welcome to the Spice Rack. I'm Shannon Spicer, and I'd like to add a little spice to your quilting. This is week 9 of my series, the Spicerack Sampler. We just have 3 more to go after this one. Our block this week I'm calling Square in a Square ad infinitum. The square in a square element is a classic. It's often called an economy block. As I've mentioned on my previous videos, I chose 12 classic designs, but I'm doing each of them in just 2 colors. Because of that, I wanted each one to have a certain level of complexity of the design. I didn't just want a single square in a square. That was too simple for the look that I was going for. So I sat down and figured out how many I could reasonably fit inside this block. It ended up being 7, and it gives it a look like it just goes on and on and on. So I named it ad infinitum. You can download a copy of this pattern by following the link below in the description. And if you're just now joining in on this series, check out my channel to see the other blocks and tutorials. This block will be easy for you if you made last week's block. That's because it's actually the same. Last week's was the snail's trail, or sometimes called the monkey wrench, but it's essentially a square in a square. The snail's trail design emerges with the specific color placement. This week, we'll just change up the color placement so that those squares emerge. So let's get started. In the past blocks we've done, where we've done a square in a square or an economy block, we've actually used the stitch and flip method, which is to take a square and put your little squares in the corners and sew corner to corner, and then you snip off the excess. But the reason I'm not going to do that with this is because you'll notice the triangles edges will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and if we kept doing that we would have a lot of waste, because with the stitch and flip method it's great, but you end up cutting off almost half of your triangle. So we could do that with the little bitty ones and not have a lot of waste, but once you get to these bigger sizes you would be wasting a lot of triangles. So I don't like waste. I do like simplicity, I like ease, but I don't like waste. So this was the way to avoid waste. And just like last week's block, the reason I'm not doing the first step as the stitch and flip method, because we could do it with it being so small and not have a lot of waste, is because of the measurements. If you were to cut your squares, your little squares for your corners, they'd be a really odd measurement, and nobody wants to cut an odd measurement, so I went with triangles instead, because you can round up on that and have a little excess and just cut off a little waste. With the stitch and flip method, you can't round up. You have to have the exact size for the corner that you need, and no one wants to mess with odd sizes. So we're going to do this completely with triangles. They alternate colors because that will give us the square in the square design. Start with the blue in the middle, and then the next outer square will be cream, and then blue, then cream, then blue, cream, and blue. So let's get started. I'm going to move these out of the way. This is quick and easy, and it's very repetitive. You just keep doing the same thing over and over. We're going to attach 2 triangles to opposite sides first. So I'm not even going to pin or anything. I'm just going to eyeball it, make sure it's in the middle. With my pattern, I made it a little bit big so we would have excess. And I'm going to sew, this is right sides together of course, I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Then I'm going to attach the other one and do the same thing. And now I've got my 2 sides done, and so I'm going to press them open. And if you don't want to get up and down every little step to go to the ironing board, you could use a seam roller. I really like this Violet Craft seam roller, not steamroller. It really rolls the seams nice and flat. I'll do that for this first one. Otherwise, I also like my iron when used in conjunction with my wool pressing pad and my tailor's clapper. And I've demonstrated those items on past videos. So that does a pretty good job. Pretty flat. So now I like to trim off these little pieces. It's not completely necessary, but I like to do it. Little dog ears. And then we will do the remaining opposite corners the same. So here we have our first square in a square, and I'm going to go ahead and trim it up. Here we go, all trimmed up. And as I said last week on our snail's trail block, which is the same, a square and a square, don't be too concerned when we're on the small size if it's a slightly bit wonky. Each outer square we're going to add, I built in excess in the measurements so that we can trim down and make it look good, and it will cover mistakes. So now we're going to go ahead and go with the next round, which is blue. Okay, and here we have the completed block. Easy peasy. And don't beat yourself up if your points don't match perfectly with each of these squares here. I know some of mine aren't perfect. What do we say? We say finished is better than perfect. I like what some people say. They say hold your quilt a certain number of feet away from you. Maybe 3 feet, maybe 6 feet. I can't remember exactly. If you can't find the mistake at that distance, then it's a-okay. No one else is going to find your mistakes. You might see them in the finished product, but I promise you no one else will. Don't be intimidated by the economy block or square in square. I admit that I was. I had never sewn one before I designed this and tested this pattern out, but it really wasn't that hard. It was really pretty easy, and it comes together pretty well. And there are so many things you can do with different colors with this. I decided, to go with just 2 colors, but you could vary each different square in a different color. You could make it a real scrappy look. You could do all sorts of different things. Be sure to check out my blog where I show a few different mock-ups to give you some different ideas of what you can do with this block. And remember, you can download the pattern using the link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Tune in next week to make block 10 with me. And if you'd like to be alerted when each pattern is released, sign up for my newsletter by following the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think of this tutorial in the comments below. And here are some images of the other completed blocks I've made so far, and a mock-up of what my finished quilt will look like with all 12 of these sampler blocks.